Everyone knows that universal rule of life. To gain something, you must sacrifice something of equal value. It's the famous law of equivalent exchange. In most anime, that usually gets settled with training arcs and a lot of screaming. But there's one series that pushed this concept to its absolute limit and left a permanent mark on pop culture: Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. For the vast majority of fans, this isn't just another random cartoon. It's widely considered the greatest anime of all time, consistently topping the rankings. And the reason is simple: it completely avoids the basic cliches. Here, alchemy is treated as an exact science. The government is rotten to its core, and trying to play God comes with brutal consequences, ones that go far beyond simply losing a fight. We're talking about two brothers who, in their innocence, committed the ultimate taboo of alchemy and paid a devastating toll with their own bodies. But don't be fooled into thinking this is just heavy drama. This story features one of the tightest, most carefully crafted screenplays I've ever seen, seamlessly blending comedy, political conspiracy, and action sequences that are an absolute thrill to watch. It's a complete journey about redemption, family, and discovering what truly makes us human. So today, we're revisiting the Elric brothers saga, from the initial trauma to the final battle against God. And of course, don't forget October 3rd. Central City is under attack by an ice-obsessed terrorist named Isaac McDougal, the freezing alchemist, who has decided to vandalize the back alleys with transmutation circles. While Führer King Bradley pretends to actually work, he offloads the responsibility to the ever-useless Colonel Mustang, who, like any good government employee, outsources the job to two traumatized children: young Edward Elric, a blonde runt with a massive Napoleon complex, and his brother Alphonse, a talking giant tin can, head out to confront the criminal. Isaac tries to turn everything into popsicles and boil everyone's blood, but he falls into a trap when Edward ignores the laws of physics and performs alchemy without drawing a single circle, proving that reading the manual is for the weak.
No transmutation, sir.
However, the freezing alchemist reveals he has tattoos on his palms and escapes custody, probably because the handcuffs were made of cardboard. While Mustang chews out the protagonist for being impulsive, Isaac breaks into prison to recruit Kimberly, an explosive psychopath who laughs in his face, telling him he'd rather enjoy his solitude than join a loser with political ideals. Isaac returns to the streets to draw more magical graffiti, convinced he can topple the government alone. The next day, the beefcake Major Armstrong joins the fray, flexing his sparkling muscles, but Isaac escapes again by turning water into steam, proving he is basically a human tea kettle. When the Elric brothers finally corner him, Isaac triggers his trap, creating massive ice mountains around headquarters while screaming about saving the country in a pathetic attempt to look like the hero. Mid-fight, he knocks Alphonse's head off only to discover the kid is hollow inside, just like his love life. Isaac realizes the children played God and attempted human transmutation, but before he can gossip further, Führer King Bradley appears and slices the man with a speed that makes you wonder if he's on steroids or just an eye-patched monster. Isaac dies in the gutter and his bootleg red stone turns to dust, while a mysterious woman watches from the shadows, disappointed by her pawn's mediocre performance. The Elric brothers are on a train heading to the countryside, taking the trip to have the mandatory traumatic flashback required of every shonen protagonist. 10 years ago, they were just happy kids who discovered they could play with alchemy, until their mother died, and they decided the best idea would be to cook up a new mom in the kitchen cauldron. Ignoring the warnings that this was forbidden, they gathered the chemical ingredients of a human being and tried to bring the old lady back, but the universe collected the income tax in advance. A giant eye opened in the floor, and they were dragged into a white dimension where a smug silhouette called Truth shoved forbidden knowledge down Edward's throat. The result was catastrophic. Instead of their mother, they created a meat slushy monster that died in seconds. Alphonse had his entire body confiscated by the divine debt collector, and Edward lost his left leg. Desperate and bleeding out, the kid sacrificed his right arm to keep his brother's soul from going down the drain, binding it to a vintage suit of armor that was decorating the room.
Take my leg, take my arm, take my heart, anything you can have! Just give it back! He's my little brother, he's all I have left!
Roy Mustang arrives at the crime scene not to arrest the kids, but to recruit child soldiers for the military, seeing potential in their misery. Granny Pinocchio curses the officer out, but Edward, fueled by spite and missing limbs, accepts the offer to try and get their bodies back. After undergoing brutal surgery to install automale prosthetics, where Winry tightened the bolts with a bit more force than necessary, a year later, he goes to Central for the state alchemist certification exam and decides to attack the Führer mid-test just to show off. Bradley, amused by the runt's audacity, grants him the title of the Fullmetal Alchemist. Back in the present, the train arrives in Liore, where the brothers hope to find the legendary philosopher's stone to fix their childhood screw-up, unaware they are about to walk into a bargain bin religious cult. The locals are obsessed with Father Cornello, a charlatan who promises to resurrect the dead in the name of the sun god, Leto. This irritates Edward, as he knows all too well that amateur necromancy ends in tragedy and lost limbs. They meet Rose, a fanatic believer with an emo fringe who thinks Cornello will bring her boyfriend back if she just prays hard enough. When Edward tries to explain basic science, she acts like he insulted her mother. Cornello, realizing a state alchemist will ruin his religious pyramid scheme, sends his goons to kill the kids, but Edward and Alphonse beat them down with the ease of someone hitting a training dummy. The priest finally shows up in person and admits he uses a philosopher's stone to trick the suckers with fake miracles. He orders Rose to shoot Edward, promising her boyfriend will return if she commits a casual homicide. The girl, proving her brilliance, fires and knocks Alphonse's head off, only to go into shock when the armor keeps walking. Cornello loses it and summons a bizarre chimera to attack.
You like that, kitty? Go on, get a good...
The protagonist rips off his shirt to show he's part cyborg and gives a sermon on how playing God only brings misery, making Cornello realize he messed with the wrong kids. The priest flees to his office, but Edward is already there waiting, sitting in his chair like he owns the place. Cornello, in a moment of supreme stupidity, confesses his entire evil plan to use religion to take over the country, unaware that Edward has keyed the town's radio microphone, broadcasting the confession to every believer outside. Desperate and humiliated, Cornello tries to attack again, but his stone malfunctions, turning his arm into a grotesque monster of pipes and pulsing flesh. Edward thrashes the mutant priest, only to find the stone was a fake as it shatters in his hand. After destroying Rose's faith and dreams, Edward tells her to stand up and walk, since she has legs that work. In the end, Cornello tries to explain himself to his bosses, Lust and Gluttony, but ends up impaled by the femme fatale's ultimate spear, and becomes an afternoon snack for the hungry fat guy. A stranger with an X-shaped scar on his face decides that a night walk is the perfect time to explode a state alchemist's head, proving that public safety in Central City is merely a suggestion. Meanwhile, our vertically challenged protagonist and his scrap metal brother arrive in the city to find Roy Mustang, seeking info on how to make chimeras, because apparently, being traumatized by human transmutation wasn't enough. Roy introduces them to Shao Tucker, the sewing life alchemist, a desperate single father living in a mansion full of books and depression. Tucker is famous for creating a talking chimera 2 years ago that only begged for death, which is a great omen. While Edward buries himself in books trying to find a cure for their own stupidity, Alphonse plays house with Tucker's daughter Nina and their dog Alexander, a cute scene that exists solely to destroy your psyche later. Tucker's evaluation deadline is looming, and the guy is sweating bullets, terrified of losing his government paycheck. The next day, when the brothers return to play, the house is disturbingly quiet. Tucker, beaming like a maniac, presents his new creation, a chimera that says, Edward. The shrimp is impressed until the creature mutters Big Brother, and the dots finally connect.
Big Brother Ed.
Edward realizes this lunatic fused his own daughter with the dog, securing the Father of the Year trophy. Edward snaps and pummels Tucker with his automail arm, but Alphonse stops the murder from happening. While Edward cries over his incompetence in saving a little girl, Scar appears at the door. The religious fanatic decides the best way to solve theological disputes is by exploding Tucker's from the inside out. In an act of mercy, he also disintegrates the Nina Chimera, prays for the souls, and removes his glasses to show off his red, edgelord eyes, proving that character design is more important than diplomacy. Edward wakes up from a nightmare and finds out Tucker and his daughter have been officially deleted from the server. Meanwhile, in Liore, the homunculi Lust, Gluttony, and Envy are watching the city descend into civil war like it's a reality show. Envy shapeshifts into Father Cornello to trick the believers believers, and when a guy named Cray tries to act smart, Gluttony eats him alive because the big guy never turns down a high-protein snack. Back in the city, the military nicknames the killer Scar because creativity isn't exactly their strong suit. Edward and Alphonse are out in the rain, lamenting their lives, when Scar appears to test the durability of Alphonse's plating. The Ishvalan ignores the laws of physics and destroys Ed's mechanical arm, humiliating the protagonist faster than a Dark Souls tutorial. Edward, rendered useless and bleeding, tries to trade his life for his brother's, but Alphonse screams at him to stop being an idiot and run. Luckily, Colonel Mustang arrives with his squad, only to find out he's completely useless in the rain since fire and water don't mix, requiring a rescue from Hawkeye. The real star, however, is Major Armstrong, who decides the best strategy is to rip off his shirt and flex his muscles at the assassin. Armstrong notices that Scar stops his alchemy halfway through, only destroying things. Seeing he's at a disadvantage against firearms and shirtless muscular men, Scar uses the old ninja tactic of exploding the ground and escaping through the sewers.
Perhaps there are too many.
You might as well give up, Scar. You're not getting away.
Alphonse scolds his brother for trying to sacrifice himself, and they decide the priority now is fixing Ed's arm so he can fix Alphonse's body. The maintenance cycle never ends. Edward and Alphonse hop on a train with Major Armstrong, who serves as both bodyguard and buff mascot since the brothers are more broken than a politician's promise. During a stop, Armstrong recognizes Dr. Marco, an ex-alchemist who runs away faster than the protagonist's father. They corner the doctor in a small town where he's been mysteriously healing people. A shaking Marco reveals he was researching the Philosopher's Stone and shows them a vial of suspicious red jelly that serves as a magical battery. Edward, who's no fool, wants the notes, but Marco plays hard to get, saying the stone is made of dead people, or worse. Eventually, the doctor caves and gives them the address of the library where he hid his dirty secrets, hoping Edward has a strong stomach. As soon as they leave, Lust shows up at the doctor's house for a far from friendly courtesy call. The brothers arrive in Resembul at the home of Granny Pinocchio and the sadistic mechanic Winry. Winry nearly has an aneurysm seeing her automail masterpiece turned into scrap metal and threatens Ed's physical integrity with a wrench. Pinocchio tells Armstrong that Edward torched his own house so he'd have nowhere to return to, which is a bit overdramatic for a 12-year-old. Winry spends 3 days without sleep, hammering metal and tightening bolts. Then comes the surgery, where she connects the arm's nerves directly to Ed's raw flesh, making him scream louder than a metal band lead singer while she likely takes sadistic pleasure in the precision of her work. With his new arm, Edward fixes Alphonse, and they flee on the first morning train. But when Winry wakes up from her sleep coma, she finds a spare screw on the floor, realizing our hero's maintenance might fall apart at any second.
Huh? Whoopsie.
The circus arrives in Central City, and our heroes discover the library has been turned into a barbecue, courtesy of Lust, the wet dream incarnation of half the audience, who burned everything just to make the licensed runt's life harder. Meanwhile, Mustang continues his desperate political campaign to become Führer, hunting Scar not for justice, but purely to get a gold star from his bosses, proving his ego is larger than the flames he produces. Edward and Alphonse get 2 new babysitters, Ross and Brosh, and go to cry their eyes out to Sheska, an ex-librarian addicted to words who was fired for reading instead of working, a level of nerdiness so extreme it actually makes you look cool. Her photographic memory, however, acts like a human external hard drive, and she transcribes Dr. Marco's encoded notes. After days of frying their remaining brain cells, the brothers crack the code and discover the secret recipe for the Philosopher's Stone. It's not made of magic and pixie dust, but of living people compressed into a soul concentrate. Armstrong finds out and starts glowing and crying at the same time, forbidding the boys from leaving. But obviously, Edward has authority issues and sneaks out to Laboratory 5 at night. He enters through the air ducts because he's anatomically compact enough to fit in a rat hole, while Alphonse stays outside and gets ambushed by a murderous tin can named Number 66. Inside, Edward encounters Number 48 and prepares to find out if size really doesn't matter against a serial-killing slicer. Outside the Laboratory of Death, Alphonse is exchanging violent pleasantries with Number 66, who removes his helmet to reveal himself as Barry the Chopper. The killer is offended to find his opponent is also empty inside and decides to use cheap psychology to convince the giant bucket of bolts that he was never human, throwing Alphonse into an identity crisis worthy of a moody teenager. Meanwhile, our pocket-sized protagonist fights number 48, the Slicer, and discovers the armor actually houses two brothers, with the younger one controlling the legs, which raises disturbing questions about his position in the metallic crotch. Edward almost gets turned into mincemeat but uses Scar's deconstruction technique to blow his opponent in half. Just as the Slicer decides to spill the lab's secrets, Lust and Envy show up for some file shredding, killing the Armor Brothers and knocking Edward out with one hit, proving that being the protagonist only guarantees you get beaten up more often. Envy carries Ed's unconscious body out like a bag of recyclable trash and tells Alphonse and the babysitters to take him to the hospital, exploding the lab immediately after to erase all traces of government incompetence. On the other end of a phone line, Hughes suggests Mustang should just get married already, the only threat capable of making the Colonel hang up on his only friend, while the maniac Kimberly hears the explosions from prison and gets excited by the sound of destruction. Edward wakes up in the hospital covered in bandages, and the first thing he gets is a slap in the face from Maria Ross for being a suicidal brat who doesn't value his own life. With his metal arm turned into scrap, he calls Winry, who travels to the capital feeling guilty for forgetting a screw during the last repair, proving her service warranty is about as reliable as a gambling site. As soon as she finishes tightening our human being's bolts, Hughes shows up and kidnaps the girl for his daughter's birthday party, because personal boundaries and a sense of danger don't exist in this man's vocabulary. The next day, Alphonse's existential crisis hits its peak and he explodes, accusing Edward of inventing his soul and lying to him his whole life.
I think I might know what it was. Maybe you wanted to say that my soul and my memories are really artificial constructions you created.
Edward gets so pissed he storms out without a word, leaving Winry to explain to the metal brute that his brother is terrified of being hated. She drops a wrench on Alphonse's hollow head and tells him to man up, or the closest an armor suit can get to that. Alphonse finds Edward on the roof, and they resolve their emotional trauma in the healthiest, most masculine way possible, by punching each other until they collapse from exhaustion. After getting beaten and realizing emotional pain is real, Alphonse apologizes, and they promise to get stronger. Far away, Scar wakes up alive in an Ishvalan shack, admiring the fancy tattooed arm he got as a gift, ready to continue turning state alchemists into abstract blood art. While Colonel Mustang wastes time reminiscing about the Ishval Civil War and promising to become the supreme dictator to protect his useless subordinates, Lieutenant Hawkeye wakes him up from his daydream to finish the paperwork before they're transferred. In the hospital, Shorty Edward tells all about Laboratory 5, but the gossip session is cut short when Führer Bradley appears out of nowhere, praising their ability to stick their noses where they don't belong and forbidding any further investigation, basically telling them to shut up. Winry heads back with tickets to Dublith, deciding to tag along because Rush Valley is on the way, and she has an uncontrollable for pieces of metal. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Hughes, who is the only character with functional neurons in this series, connects the dots regarding the riots and discovers the whole secret. But since intelligence is fatal in this anime, he is cornered by Lust and her killer manicure. He manages to escape, bleeding out, and runs to a phone booth to warn Mustang, but forgets that dropping a family photo on the ground is a death sentence. Envy appears in disguise, and when Hughes hesitates to shoot the image of his own wife, he takes a fatal hit, proving that the power of friendship and love only serves to kill you faster.
You look surprised.
What the hell are you?
At the funeral, while everyone cries and his daughter traumatizes the audience by asking why they're burying Daddy, Roy Mustang weeps, pretending it's only the rain on his face, while promising to investigate who killed his only competent friend.
It's a terrible day for rain.
What do you mean? It's not raining.
Yes, it is.
The group arrives in Rush Valley, the promised land for prosthetic freaks, and Winry nearly has a mechanical orgasm seeing so much shiny scrap. While Edward tries to show off and fails miserably, he notices his state alchemist pocket watch has been stolen by a pickpocket named Paninia. They chase her into the mountains, where they discover the girl has automail legs with built-in cannons, because apparently, everyone in this town is a walking weapon. Winry, instead of arresting the thief, decides she wants to stroke her legs to analyze the engineering. The chase leads them to the home of a grumpy old man named Dominic, who refuses to take apprentices. Chaos ensues when his daughter-in-law goes into labor in the middle of a storm. Edward panics completely, proving that knowing how to dismantle reality at a molecular level is useless when a baby is crowning. Winry takes charge, channeling all the medical knowledge she read in books instead of going out to play, and brings the child into the world. After the miracle of life, which leaves Edward shocked to see something created without a transmutation circle, Winry takes advantage of the runt's distraction to crack open his watch. She expects to find state secrets, but instead discovers only a single phrase engraved, "Don't forget October 3rd, the day they burned down their own house." Touched by their dramatic stupidity, she decides to stay to learn more about automail, shipping the Elric brothers off to their next disaster. Edward and Alphonse arrive in Dublith shaking with fear, and with good reason, because teacher Izumi Curtis welcomes them with a beating that would make social services weep. After thrashing the kids and coughing up half a liter of blood like it's normal, she discovers they are looking for the Philosopher's Stone. The conversation gets tense when she mentions meeting their father, Hohenheim, the man who went out for cigarettes and never came back. But Edward has a tantrum and refuses to listen. At bedtime, the brothers have traumatic flashbacks of their training on Yak Island, where Izumi dumped 2 kids in the jungle with a knife and told them to survive for a month to decipher the phrase, "One is all is one." They spent 30 days eating bugs and getting beat up by nature until they realized the phrase meant they were worth nothing in the grand scheme of the universe, which was apparently the right answer. Back in the present, Izumi realizes the boys committed the taboo of human transmutation because Edward can perform alchemy without a transmutation circle. She reveals she also tried to revive her dead child, and the universe collected its fee by taking her internal organs, explaining all the blood. In a rare moment of affection, instead of hitting them, she hugs the 2 idiots, saying they don't need to carry the world on their shoulders, proving that behind all that domestic violence is a broken maternal heart. The Elric brothers finally make it back alive, but Izumi decides the best reward for surviving is expulsion, because nothing says "I care" quite like kicking kids out of the house. Disappointed, they head to the station, but her husband Sig has to explain the obvious to Edward's pea-sized brain. If they're no longer students, they're now equals and can, talk like normal human beings. Realizing their own stupidity, they rush back to ask about the toll for the Gate of Truth. Izumi theorizes that Alphonse must have seen the premium version of the universe since he paid with his entire body, but the tin boy remembers nothing, proving that trauma is the ultimate hard drive wiper. While they eat dinner, a reptilian stalker with a wall-climbing watches from the shadows. Meanwhile, Roy Mustang plays chess and gets a promotion to the big city, taking his crew of competent lackeys with him. In the slums, Scar kills some bounty hunters tipped off by a local snitch, because the cycle of hatred is the only gym he ever hits. Back with the characters that actually matter, Alphonse receives an anonymous love note and goes to meet a group of rejected furries who introduce themselves as chimeras. Their leader is Greed, a homunculus having a midlife crisis who wants to know how the kid bound his soul to armor so he can achieve immortality. When Alphonse refuses to spill the secret, Greed orders his bull-like henchmen to attack him just to show he can regenerate like a lizard. Edward, the alchemist who needs a step stool to reach the top shelf, bursts through the door, demanding his brother back. Greed offers an info swap, but the braided midget has the diplomacy of a rhino and starts a brawl. The problem is, Greed's body turns into an indestructible shield. In the middle of the beatdown, Ed's last 2 brain cells finally connect. The shield is made of carbon. He uses alchemy to turn the villain's diamond-hard skin into cheap pencil lead, softening him up for the kill.
There's one other important thing I noticed.
But before he can finish the job, Izumi shows up like a possessed housewife to lay the smackdown on everyone. Bradley, the Führer, who looks like a harmless grandpa, decides to inspect the Devil's Nest personally. And by inspect, I mean slice and dice anyone drawing breath. Greed smells trouble and tries to bolt, but Bradley chops his hand off and reveals that, despite his age, he fights like he's got cheat codes enabled. Meanwhile, Major Armstrong decides to have a bodybuilding contest with the Chimera Roa, turning the battle into a buffed-up homoerotic art show. The party ends when Bradley decides he's played enough and carves Greed's animal friends into sushi cubes. force. Greed tries to fight back, but discovers his ultimate shield is worthless against the old man's ultimate eye, which sees every move before it happens. Bradley massacres the rebel homunculus until he looks like a pincushion. The day's trauma award goes to Martel, the snake chimera hiding inside Alphonse's armor trying to control his body. Bradley thrusts his sword into the metal with surgical precision, killing the woman inside. Her blood splashes onto Alphonse's blood seal, and the shock is so great it unlocks his memories of the day of the human transmutation, because nothing refreshes the mind like a fresh bloodbath. With Greed captured and turned into a human pincushion, Bradley takes him underground to meet the father of the homunculi. Father, who looks like he hasn't slept in centuries, decides that a rebellious son doesn't need a timeout. He needs recycling. He hurls Greed into a tank, draining his essence without a shred of remorse. It proves their family dynamic makes any soap opera look healthy.
I shall drink to the promised day and to your undying loyalty.
On the surface, Salim, Bradley's normal son, shows up all chipper wanting to be an alchemist, unaware his dad just drank his uncle for dinner. Scar continues his serial killer tour by murdering a peg-legged alchemist and tossing him into the water like recyclable trash. The next day, Scar finds a fainted girl named Mei Chang who uses a weird form of alchemy to heal Scar and owns a tiny panda that bites annoying people. In Central, Barry the Chopper tries to attack Hawkeye, but discovers she has more lead in her pistol than he has brains in his hollow armor, ending up as the military's pet prisoner. Basically, he tried to flirt and got shot, the story of many men's lives. The Elric brothers arrive in Rush Valley to fix Ed's arm, which was trashed in the fight with Greed, but Winry realizes she's out of parts and does a patch job that looks like a middle school craft project. While waiting, they find Ling Yao, a prince of Xing passed out from hunger, who is essentially a gastric black hole. Ling reveals he's looking for immortality to become emperor, and his masked ninja bodyguard starts scrapping with the brothers. Edward gets schooled by a masked girl and his janky arm gets destroyed again, proving his engineering lasts shorter than a politician's promised. In a rare moment of genius, Edward uses his broken arm as bait in a cartoon-style trap and captures the ninja, whose name is Lan Fan. After wrecking half the town and leaving the locals furious and demanding compensation, Ling pretends he doesn't speak the language and bails.
This guy and his little entourage should be paying for everything.
So sorry, I don't understand much language of this country. Okay, bye-bye now.
Hey, you get the hell back here!
Back at the shop, Winry has a fit of rage and pummels Edward with a wrench over the broken arm. In the end, in an act of collective masochism, everyone decides to head to Central together. The Elrics, the psychopathic mechanic, and the freeloading prince who invites himself along without chipping in a cent for gas. The Elric brothers finally arrive in Central City, but our short alchemist's mood is worse than usual because he hates being stalked by ninjas who don't understand the concept of personal space. While little Ed tries to ditch the stalkers, Prince Ling passes out from hunger in a gutter and is promptly arrested by immigration, proving that not even in anime does bureaucracy forgive. Meanwhile, Havoc is hiding out guarding Barry the Chopper, who is basically an empty sardine can with homicidal instincts. But the real news is that Havoc finally scored a date with a girl named Solaris, having no clue she's actually Lust, and that the he admires so much likely hides claws capable of dicing him into cubes. Seriously, the guy has a radar for dangerous women that works better than state alchemy. The joy is short-lived though. Edward decides to visit Hughes to drop some news, but runs into Lieutenant Ross and finds out Hughes bit the dust a long time ago. The shock is so great his OS almost crashes. Edward rushes to confront the widow Gracia, blaming himself for dragging her husband into this mess in a scene that's a total tearjerker. In the end, Lieutenant Ross is framed for Hughes's murder because military intelligence is an oxymoron, and Mustang starts pulling strings while Havoc heads out for the deadliest romantic date of his life. Lieutenant Ross's situation goes from bad to worse when the military police decide she's guilty just because the ballistics match, ignoring the fact that anyone can steal a gun in this universe. Falman, who was playing chess with Barry's empty armor, sees the news and panics. Barry, being the agent of chaos he is, decides sitting still is boring and breaks into the prison just because he can. He smashes through the walls, shows everyone he's hollow inside, much like this show's writers, and frees Ling, who just wanted a snack. Barry then breaks Ross out of her cell. She's confused about being rescued by a metallic serial killer, but accepts her fate since being executed wasn't in her weekend plans. They run to a warehouse, only to run into Mustang, who apparently woke up in the mood for a barbecue. Before the horrified eyes of Edward and Alphonse, Mustang incinerates Ross until she's an unrecognizable charred heap.
You're Maria Ross, right?
Edward snaps and tries to charge the colonel, but he's held back by his scrap metal brother. Mustang strikes a cold and calculating military man pose and says he was just following orders, leaving everyone wanting to punch his lights out. Later, we find out Barry has an original human body that now has the mind of an animal and is hunting the armor because soul alchemy is weird. Meanwhile, Armstrong grabs Ed, whose arm is still trashed, and drags him on a mysterious trip out east, while Lust continues to think everything is under control. Edward is dragged through the desert to the ruins of Xerxes, suffering more from the heat than a snowman at the beach, only to find Major Armstrong and Brita are in on the scheme. After nearly dying of heat stroke and taking a bath, he gets the surprise of his life. Lieutenant Ross is alive and well, hiding in the ruins. Turns out Mustang is a manipulative genius who used a realistic dummy made of pork and fake teeth to fake the execution. He even pretended to talk to a girlfriend on the phone to dodge wiretaps, proving he lies as easily as he breathes. Armstrong tries to give Ross a bear hug, but she flees like he's the plague in a scene that's a mix of sweat, muscles, and secondhand embarrassment. But the mood gets heavy when Edward meets Ishvalan refugees in the ruins. An old woman tells the story of how Winry's parents treated everyone during the war until they were killed by a man with an X-shaped scar on his forehead. Yes, folks, the killer of Ed's future in-laws is Scar, making the world of this anime smaller than an egg. Back in Central, the chaos continues as Barry's original body, now with a rat brain and drooling, attacks Havoc's group. Riza Hawkeye is on a roof playing sniper but is ambushed by Gluttony, who appears out of nowhere looking like he's about to mistake the lieutenant for a Thanksgiving turkey. She pumps him full of lead, but the creature regenerates faster than the audience's patience for fillers, leaving Riza in a tight spot, while Lieutenant Hawkeye wastes the entire military budget shooting at Gluttony. The fat monster just absorbs the bullets like an American at a fast food sale. Roy Mustang finally decides to put in some work, blasts the creature off the tower, and complains about sweating in his uniform.
Dessert.
The party ends quickly when they raid Laboratory 3 and run into Lust herself. The homunculus humors Havoc for being a lonely loser and reveals her favorite hobby is sticking her long fingers into unsuspecting men. Lust decides that Havoc needs a lesson and attacks him. She then takes the opportunity to lunge at Mustang, stabbing him in the abdomen and destroying his glove. But Roy, being a stubborn pyromaniac, carves a circle into his own hand, uses a lighter, and cauterizes his own wound while screaming in agony. Wholesome family fun. He then decides to teach Lust the concept of a spawn kill, burning the woman repeatedly until her philosopher's stone gives up on life and she turns into cosmic dust.
You killed me.
Meanwhile, Barry the Chopper's human body crawls over to the armor, scratches the blood seal, and commits the most bizarre assisted suicide in history, taking the armor down with it. In the end, Edward returns home and finds the deadbeat dad of the year, Hohenheim, standing in front of his mother's grave, probably trying to remember the name of the son he abandoned. The most awkward family reunion of the century happens at the cemetery, where Edward barks at his dad like an angry pincher. Hohenheim just drops a truth bomb. The creature they transmuted years ago might not have even been their mother, basically calling the kids incompetent with class. This triggers an existential crisis in Edward, who decides to devote himself to the super healthy hobby of digging up his mother in the middle of a storm, while Granny Pinocchio lends a hand and starts questioning her own life choices. After poking through the bones and black hair of the aberration, Edward has a manic laughing fit upon realizing the autopsy confirms they didn't kill their mother a second time. The thing looked nothing like her. He calls Izumi, who also confirms her transmuted baby didn't look human, lifting a massive weight off everyone's conscience. Apparently, creating random monsters is less traumatic than deforming your parents. The shrimp realizes Alphonse's body didn't vanish. It's just waiting at the gate of truth, like a package stuck at the post office that never gets delivered. Edward heads back to Central and gives Alphonse the news. Alphonse is stoked to know his original body is just locked in another dimension and not rotting in a hole. They renew their pact to get their bodies back, and Winry watches Edward, noticing his shoulders have gotten broader, probably from carrying the weight of childhood trauma and stupid decisions. At the hospital, Mustang proves his priority is lust, complaining he'd rather share a room with a hot nurse than with Havoc, who is now officially a human paperweight without the use of his legs. Roy, with the sensitivity of a brick wall, tells the paralyzed man not to give up, while secretly planning to use Havoc's retirement as motivation for his own ego. Meanwhile, Edward and Alphonse discuss conspiracy theories about Alphonse's body, reaching the scientific conclusion that Edward is a garden gnome because his nutrition is being Wi-Fi'd to his brother's body in the afterlife. Deciding to do the smartest thing possible, the Elric brothers roam the city doing magic tricks to lure Scar out, hoping the serial killer will serve as bait for the homunculi, because putting their own lives at risk is their favorite sport. The genius plan works. Scar shows up to wreck them.
Don't shoot, Lieutenant.
What? You can't be serious!
I'm trying out the Colonel's sport. I think I might be able to catch a few fish.
And Ling Yao joins the party with Lan Fan to hunt Gluttony, who was just looking for a snack. The mess attracts Führer Bradley, who decides to join the fray personally. The old man shows that age is just a number and charges Lan Fan with the speed of an internet rumor. He slices her mask off and proves that in this anime, seniors with swords are more dangerous than nuclear weapons, leaving the Prince of Xing in a panic as the situation goes south in record time. The chase remains frantic as Ling carries his pocket waifu Lan Fan like a bag of premium potatoes, while King Bradley proves he's built different with a magic eye that sees in 4K. The Führer notices Ling is using the injured girl as dead weight and kindly suggests he ditch her, but Ling refuses to abandon the cargo. Bradley hurls a sword mid-chase, revealing his ultimate eye and ending any hope for privacy. Meanwhile, Winry visits Hughes's grave and decides to walk right into the area where Edward and Alphonse are battling Scar, because apparently she has a radar for traumatic situations. Edward and Alphonse try to hide the truth, but Ed, with the delicacy of a hippo, starts blabbing about the Ishvalan War and how Winry's parents were slaughtered by the guy they just saved. Winry hears everything, has a mental breakdown, and picks up a discarded pistol, pointing it at her parents' killer. It turns out therapy in Amestris is based on armed vengeance. Scar, seeing the girl trembling with the gun, flashes back to his tragic past, where his tattooed brother gave him his right arm before dying, saving him from Kimbley's wrath. Back in the present, Scar dares Winry to shoot, but Edward throws himself in front of her in a heroic pose that triggers Scar's flashbacks. Edward takes the chance to preach to the mechanic, reminding her that her hands were made to give life and build overpriced automail, not to kill. Winry drops the gun and sobs in the midget's arms.
It's your hands. They weren't meant to kill.
While Scar bails because the mood got too heavy, even for a serial killer. Ling continues his marathon run carrying Lan Fan, while Bradley sends Gluttony to sniff out the blood trail like the world's fattest bloodhound. Realizing her left arm has become extra weight hindering her prince's escape, Lan Fan decides to go hardcore cosplay and severs her own limb, strapping it to a stray dog to distract the Führer. Meanwhile, Mustang tries to act tough by sending Hawkeye into the field despite being held together by stitches. Edward sends Winry away from the danger zone, promising to explain everything later, and heads back to save his metal brother from Scar's clutches. Suddenly, Gluttony appears drooling, and Scar realizes this monster doesn't die easy. Ling emerges from the sewers shirtless, ready for some fan service, and shoves a grenade into Gluttony's mouth, blowing the top off the homunculus. Ling binds the regenerating body with steel cables, thinking he's caught a rare Pokemon. Hawkeye arrives in a getaway car to rescue them, picking up Ling and the rest of the circus, but before they can finish Scar, a little girl named Mei Chang appears, calls Edward a bean, and escapes with the killer using alkahestry smoke. Later, at Dr. Knox's clandestine clinic, the grumpy doc sews up Lan Fan's stump, while Ling drops the bombshell. King Bradley is a homunculus. Discussions about who gets the Philosopher's Stone are cut short when Gluttony hears Mustang's name, loses it, and opens his stomach to reveal a giant eye. He decides it's lunchtime and destroys half the house. Envy is playing babysitter to Dr. Marco, serving food and threatening to level entire villages if he doesn't cooperate. Meanwhile, Bradley chats with the higher-ups in his office about how troublesome the youth of today are. Back in the forest, Gluttony decides to have a barbecue and tries to swallow Mustang's fire, proving he has the stomach of an ostrich.
It would be foolish to let him leave here alive.
Mustang, realizing his flames are just appetizers, flees with Hawkeye's help, leaving the Elric brothers and Ling to deal with the hungry freak. Edward and Alphonse try to fight, but soon notice a weird dog that is actually Envy, who came to pick up Gluttony. Envy makes the fatal mistake of calling Edward a pipsqueak, which nearly starts World War III. Ling jumps into the fight against Envy, slashing, kicking, and insulting him until Envy plays dirty and transforms into Lan Fan. Ling hesitates for a second, long enough for Gluttony to open the portal to hell in his gut and swallow Ling, Edward, and Envy in one go. Alphonse is left alone screaming, realizing his brother just became homunculus food. Elsewhere, Mustang decides to storm Central HQ, thinking he's a big shot, trying to bluff the generals about Bradley being a monster. However, upon entering the meeting room, he finds the entire military high command furious with him. Mustang finally realizes he walked into the lion's den voluntarily, and that corruption didn't just arrive, it bought the whole building. Meanwhile, Edward wakes up in a sea of blood surrounded by trash, realizing he's ended up in the worst Airbnb in existence. After a constructive discussion where they call each other idiots and envious, they conclude they were swallowed by Gluttony, which explains the large intestine decor. While Ling tries to remember the dinner menu, Edward loses it because the place reeks of death and lacks an emergency exit. Outside, the tiny panda Mei Chang realizes she's lost her anorexic mascot and decides to join Scar. Back in slow digestion, Edward realizes he's starving and decides his tanned leather boot is a gourmet meal, chewing on his footwear while Ling watches with culinary envy. The bizarre picnic is interrupted by Envy, who pops up to inform them they are in a dimensional dead end created by Father, a counterfeit version of the Gate of Truth that leads nowhere. To top it off, the homunculus confesses with a sadistic grin that he started the Ishvalan War by killing a guy, proving he's the most detestable being to ever walk the earth. Edward tries to charge Envy with the fury of a midget, but the homunculus reveals his true form, a giant lizard covered in agonized souls.
Okay then.
Meanwhile, in the tensest office in the country, Bradley explains to Mustang that he's controlled everything since the nation's founding and transfers Hawkeye to be his personal hostage, ensuring the colonel stays in line. In Gluttony's stomach, Edward and Ling ready their blades to face the colossal monster, unaware that Alphonse has discovered the daddy of the villains is waiting at the center of it all, for the most messed up family reunion in history. Envy continues to toss the heroes around with his depressive kaiju body, using the faces of tortured souls to distract Edward. Edward is shocked to hear a want to play coming from the monster's skin, triggering traumas he'd rather forget. But mid-beatdown, the Fullmetal Alchemist notices chunks of the Xerxes ruins floating in the gastric juice and has a suicidal epiphany. He proposes using Envy's Philosopher's Stone to perform human transmutation on themselves, basically deconstructing themselves atom by atom in the hope of reassembling on the other side without turning into a puddle of jelly. Meanwhile, Bradley decides to tell Mustang his origin story, revealing he was trained in a Spartan kindergarten, where graduation consisted of being injected with a Philosopher's Stone and not dying screaming. He was the 12th to survive, earning the title of Wrath and a charming eye patch. Back in the biological sewer, Edward draws the transmutation circle and convinces the monster and the greedy prince to come along for the ride. The plan works, and the shrimp crosses the true gate, but what he finds there makes his heart stop. Before him is Alphonse's original body, sitting there looking like an anorexic model who hasn't eaten in 5 years, with long hair and exposed ribs. Edward rushes to pull his brother back, but the little black hands of truth grab him by the seat of his pants. He's dragged out screaming, promising to return for his brother's skeleton, as the door slams in his face, proving that in this anime no victory comes without a massive dose of depression. The anime decides we've forgotten everything that happened so far and throws us into a recap episode disguised as a drunken fever dream. We find ourselves at an old party where a younger Hohenheim is drinking his weight in booze while Pinako Rockbell, in a version that hasn't shrunken with age yet, tries to socialize. The immortal old man observes humanity with the disdain of someone who's seen way too many people making bad life choices and starts reminiscing about all the traumatic moments that brought us here. We're forced to rewatch Amestress's greatest hits of misery, from the Elric brothers' failed attempt to bring their mother back, creating a meat monster in the process, to Hughes's death, which still makes grown men cry in the shower. We revisit Laboratory 5, the bloody wars, and the homunculi's plan to turn everyone into giant human batteries. Hohenheim insists humans are weak and pathetic, but Pinocchio and a hallucination of Trisha try to convince him otherwise, showing motivational clips of Mustang incinerating lust and Edward putting greed in his place. The highlight reel continues with Scar getting his brother's arm and Lan Fan cutting off her own limb, because apparently mutilation is a synonym for courage in this universe. The episode ends with Hohenheim waking up in a cold sweat, realizing all that philosophical talk was just a nostalgic nightmare. He concludes he needs to stop drinking before bed if he wants to save the world from the total annihilation Father has planned. The episode kicks off with a gastric horror show as Gluttony vomits envy, Edward and Ling in a disgusting reverse birth. They land right in Father's lair, a guy who is a carbon copy of Hohenheim, proving character design recycling is alive and well. Father looks at Edward and Alphonse, sees they're more broken than the economy, and decides to heal Edward, completely ignoring the law of equivalent exchange. Apparently, hacking the system is an admin privilege. Ling senses the old man is dangerous, but Father cuts off the Wi-Fi of the Elric brothers' alchemy, leaving them as useless as an ashtray on a motorcycle. The Prince of Xing decides to charge in, but Father likes his nerve and decides to shove a liquid philosopher's stone into his face. Ling accepts that hot red liquid without a complaint, claiming he'll do anything for power, and ends up becoming the new Greed.
Then let's see if your stomach matches your appetite. Can you handle this?
Scar and little Mei Chang try to fight, but their alchemy is the only thing working because it runs on a different server. In the chaos, the new Greed remembers no one and beats the hell out of Edward. Scar discovers he can't deconstruct Father, and they flee through the sewers, leaving Gluttony to die again because his stone's battery ran out. The episode ends with Edward realizing his friend is now a schizophrenic with a dual personality and superpowers. Envy takes the Elric brothers to the penthouse to meet the CEO of evil, King Bradley, who is also Wrath. The mustache man explains to Edward that if he steps out of line or quits his job as a state alchemist, Winry will have a premature meeting with her maker, turning the protagonist into a premium hostage. They run into Mustang, who's there pretending he understands the plan, and shortly after, Alphonse leaves while smuggling Mei Chang and her tiny panda inside his armor, right between his legs, a place that has never seen this much action before. Meanwhile, Lan Fan discovers Ling has become a homunculus vessel and decides she needs a new arm fast to be useful again. At Dr. Knox's house, Lan Fan and Mei start a waifu deathmatch fueled by patriotism and idolatry until the doctor throws food at their heads to stop the mess. Edward tries to use alchemy and realizes it's flowing again, confirming Father has an on-off switch for his powers. He decides to investigate how alchemy works, since it's apparently the only way to bypass the bald villain's operating system. Underground, Marco tells Scar that the Ishvalan War was just a pretext to farm XP and create stones, which leaves Scar pissed off enough to want the whole story. We travel to the past to see a young Mustang getting rejected by Riza Hawkeye's father, who refuses to teach flame alchemy to a military man. Cut to the present and we get the moment you probably paused for, Lieutenant Hawkeye taking a shower and revealing a massive tattoo on her back that her father burned into her. Edward enters her house to return her gun, and things get awkward real fast. Riza starts telling the most depressing bedtime story ever about the Ishval Civil War. Basically, the Amestrian army turned the desert into a giant barbecue. We see Kimberly blowing people up with a psychopathic grin, Mustang with the dead eyes of someone who lost his soul, and Hughes realizing he's dug his own moral grave. King Bradley appears to deliver an edgy atheist speech saying God doesn't care about anyone and that justice is done with one's own hands. In the present, Hawkeye hears it all and says Mustang wants to change the country to atone for his sins. A great plan, provided he doesn't die first. Meanwhile, Alphonse accidentally flirts with Mei Chang by saying his real human body is quite handsome, making the girl switch crushes faster than an outfit change. The episode ends with Envy bringing food to Marco, only to discover a headless body and the word vengeance written on the wall, while Edward leaves Riza's house knowing she's dying to put a bullet in the Führer's eye if she gets the chance. The pint-sized protagonist warns his armor brother that Mei Chang has vanished, proving their incredible competence at monitoring a child and a panda. Meanwhile, Mustang's team team is being deported to every corner of the country like unwanted chess pieces, and the colonel sits in his office alone, mourning his solitude and moving pieces on a board to pretend he has control over his life. The next day, Mustang shows up to give the Elric brothers a ride, but he nearly flips the car when he insists that Edward repay a ridiculous debt of 520 cents. Edward decides to keep the debt open as an excuse for Mustang not to die before becoming a dictator. Suddenly, Old Man Fu shows up furious because his granddaughter lost her arm, and Dr. Knox has to stop the elderly ninja from beating everyone up in the clinic. The nightmare continues as Kimberly, the psychopath in the white suit, is released from prison. He starts pulling pranks by blowing up guards for fun and gets into a car driven by envy, forming the most toxic duo since Romeo and Juliet. He's given the mission to hunt Scar and Marco with a license to blow up anything in his path, which gets him worryingly excited. To top it off, Scar decides Dr. Marco is too famous, so he performs a brutal facial harmonization on the old man using destructive alchemy, deforming his face so even his mother wouldn't recognize him, before fleeing north with May and Yoki in tow.
Destroyed the surface.
Edward and Alphonse are wandering the city like two idiots looking for Mei Cheng's panda cat, as if finding an obese mascot is going to save the world. Meanwhile, in the east, Mei bumps into an old lady on a train who is actually General Grumman doing some horrifying Big Mama's House cosplay. Mustang meets this cross-dressing aberration in a cemetery and finds out the old man is dying to pull off a coup d'etat. Armstrong shows up to send the Elric brothers north to find his sister, who is apparently a demon in human form. Before they leave, the brothers run into Salim Bradley, the Führer's son, and Edward's #1 fanboy, and end up being invited to dinner at the villain's house. The scene is more tense than Thanksgiving dinner with a conspiracy theorist uncle, with King Bradley acting like a normal dad while everyone knows he's a murderous homunculus. Mistress Bradley is living in fairyland and notices nothing, but the brothers leave sweating bullets and decide that fleeing to the ice is better than facing that mustache again. Scar and his troop of fugitives jump off the train to throw off the pursuit, but Kimberly, using his gunpowder-sniffing dog nose, catches onto the move and stays on their tail. Edward and Alphonse take the train north, thinking they're going to see pretty snow, unaware they're headed straight for a place where hypothermia is the least of their problems and hospitality involves a sword to the throat. Kimberly proves he's the military's most efficient stalker and invades the train where Scar is supposed to be. He finds a hooded man and, thinking he's caught Dr. Marco, discovers it's just useless Yoki serving as live bait. Scar emerges from the shadows to start the rematch, and the two turn the train car into a crumpled sardine can. The Crimson Alchemist takes a pipe straight to the gut, but instead of dying, he blows the car coupling and escapes laughing like a drugged-up maniac, shouting that being chased by death gives him a total rush. Meanwhile, Edward and Alphonse arrive in the north dressed like they're going to the mall and decide to ignore warnings not to leave the road. Result, they get lost in a blizzard and are attacked by Captain Buccaneer, a human bear who thought it was a good idea to replace his arm with a giant chainsaw. Edward tries to fight back but learns the hard way that his cheap metal automail freezes up in the cold, nearly becoming mincemeat before being captured. They are dragged inside the wall of Briggs and thrown at the feet of General Armstrong. Edward tries to use Major Armstrong's recommendation letter, but the Ice Queen rips the paper in his face without reading it, proving nepotism doesn't work in the Arctic. She makes it clear that only the strong survive there, leaving our short protagonist in a very delicate position, while Marco and May unearth secrets in the snow far away. Our little Fullmetal Alchemist discovers that having metal limbs in the freezing north is about as brilliant as licking a pole in winter, as his flesh starts wanting a divorce from his automail. General Armstrong, who exudes more testosterone than the entire cast, decides she won't kick the midget brothers out of the fortress, only because she wants to use Mei Cheng's healing alchemy as a weapon of war. It's military capitalism at its peak. She throws the brothers to Major Miles, who creates a moment of racial tension by removing his glasses to reveal Ishvalan red eyes, testing if Edward is a closet racist or just a standard idiot. After passing the cultural sensitivity test and finding useless Fallman scraping ice, the party in the basement begins. A brainless hunk with the Ouroboros symbol decides to dig a hole into the base of the fortress with his bare hands, ignoring bullets like they're mosquitoes. The monster, going by the creative name Sloth and possessing the IQ of a door, invades the research area looking for the way home. General Armstrong, being the subtle woman she is, decides the best way to handle an intruder in a confined space isn't dialogue, it's firing a tank directly into his face. While Edward tries to explain the thing is a homunculus, and that setting it on fire is useless because it regenerates faster than a politician's dignity, Armstrong decides that if fire doesn't work, she'll show him true Briggs brute force. The basement battle turns into a poorly planned barbecue when General Armstrong decides to douse Sloth in special fuel. The genius plan involves using the homunculus's natural stupidity to lure him onto a balcony and dump him into the freezing cold outside, where the fuel evaporates and turns the monster into a giant meat popsicle. Since the creature is immortal but apparently allergic to winter, he goes into forced hibernation, proving the best weapon against evil is the ambient temperature. While Edward is tossed into a cell for being uncooperative, the explosive psychopath Kimberly awakens from his coma. Underground, Edward plays connect the dots on a map of Amestris and realizes the entire country is a giant transmutation circle designed to sacrifice everyone. Basically, the government isn't content with just taxing citizens, now they want to turn their souls into fuel. Raven goes down to inspect the frozen sloth and has the nerve to say it's just an overdeveloped chimera, lying so badly that even Edward feels offended. He tries to recruit Armstrong into the Immortal Villains Club, promising a zombie army that doesn't need meal vouchers. The general feigns interest, smiling while planning how to dispose of this human trash. While Edward realizes the situation just went from pretty bad to total apocalypse. The episode starts with a depressing flashback of Hohenheim being the worst father of the year, crying over his immortality, and deciding to abandon his wife and kids to go buy eternal cigarettes because he's afraid of being a monster. Back in the present, murderous shadows slaughter soldiers in the underground tunnel, but General Armstrong is too busy playing 4D chess with General Raven, the corrupt old man, thinking he's convinced her to join the population sacrifice scheme in exchange for immortality, makes the classic mistake of relaxing around a woman who sleeps with a sword. Armstrong, tired of the small talk about gods and the New World Order, stabs the old man in the arm and decides he'd be much more useful as construction material. With a coldness that makes the Briggs winter look like summer, she dumps Raven into the fresh, wet cement sealing the tunnel. The idiot sinks while screaming about his dreams of eternal life.
But immortality was right before I was going to be immortal.
And Armstrong responds with the ultimate homicidal dad joke, saying he'll be the foundation of the fortress. Cleaning her blood-stained gloves like she's brushing off breadcrumbs, she takes total control. But the joy is short-lived because Winry arrives at the fortress, brought by Kimberly under the flimsy excuse of automail maintenance, when she's actually the perfect hostage to keep the brothers in line. Edward realizes he's screwed. Meanwhile, in Central, Colonel Mustang buys out a flower girl's entire stock just to get a secret note from Armstrong, proving he's the only man capable of turning gardening into high-level espionage. As the blonde mechanic adjusts Edward's automail arm, Kimberly walks into the room to make sure everyone knows he's a well-mannered psychopath. Far away, Buccaneer and his crew descend into a dark hole looking for dead bodies, and find shadows with eyes instead, proving curiosity kills more than forbidden alchemy. In Central, Riza Hawkeye goes to deliver some papers to the Fuhrer, and ends up facing Salim Bradley, who decides to reveal that he's anything but an innocent child. The kid extends razor-sharp shadows, cuts her face, and introduces himself as Pride, the original homunculus and every babysitter's nightmare, making it clear he'll be watching her like a spectral stalker. Back in the freezing north, Kimberly drags the Fullmetal midget into a private room and lays it all out. He wants 3 things: Scar, Dr. Marco, and to turn Briggs into a sea of blood to draw a giant transmutation circle. When Edward refuses to participate in recreational genocide, Kimberly pulls the blackmail card, reminding him that Winry is right there, and it would be a shame if something happened to that pretty face. With the mechanic as a hostage, and a philosopher's stone dangling in front of him like a dog treat, the protagonist swallows his pride and accepts the mission, forcing a smile while planning how to get out of this mess without becoming mincemeat. Riza gets home so traumatized, she mistakes her own dog for Pride's demon, while Mustang calls her using florist code to figure out why she looks like she's seen a ghost. Meanwhile, in the north, the hunt for Scar begins in Baschool. The Elric brothers try to ditch Kimberly's soldiers to find the fugitive themselves, but stumble upon Mei Cheng, who is still delusional, thinking Alphonse is Prince Charming despite him being an empty tin can. The reunion is interrupted by Yoki, who decides to tell his life story but is successfully ignored by absolutely everyone because not even the script cares about him. But peace is short-lived as 2 low-budget furries, Jerso and Zompano, corner Scar. The poor Ishvalan tries to fight, but he's immobilized by a jet of of disgusting saliva that Jerso spits with the precision of a llama. That's the cue for the Elric brothers to enter the fray. Edward, overconfident with his new lightweight limbs, underestimates the situation and ends up covered in the Toadman's viscous slime, making his strikes slippery and useless. Luckily, Edward remembers science exists, freezes the secretion, and traps the chimeras before things get more humiliating. When Scar tries to retaliate and aim for Ed's face, Winry pops out of nowhere to stop the bar fight. Miles arrives with the cavalry to arrest everyone, but the mechanic demands to speak with her parents' killer. Before group therapy can start, an explosion rocks the area. Captain Buccaneer miraculously escapes the tunnel of death, and in Baschool, Edward runs out of the rubble faking a panic attack, screaming that Winry has been kidnapped by Scar, while the Ishvalan carries her over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes in a Razzie-worthy performance. The Crimson Alchemist, who couldn't care less about anyone's safety but his own, tries to blow everything up, but Scar escapes with the blonde, leaving Edward looking like a chump to the audience, but relieved inside. In a quick flashback, we see that Winry, tired of being a useless damsel in distress, masterminded her own kidnapping to take the target off the brothers' backs, proving she has more guts than half the male cast. The most random group in the world forms in the mine tunnels: Scar, the panda girl May, useless Yoki, Dr. Marco, and the two chimeras who decided to switch teams after Alphonse's motivational speech about deformed bodies. As they flee through the mining sewers, Miles discovers Briggs has been taken over by Central Guys, and that General Armstrong has been called to the principal's office. Basically, the jig is up. The safe escape plan went down the drain, and now they're walking into a frozen trap. Since Alphonse doesn't feel the cold, no skin, nerves, or blood, he volunteers to run through the blizzard to warn the group. But in the middle of the whiteout, his mind glitches and he wakes up in front of the Gate of Truth. There, he sees his original body, emaciated and looking like a horror movie runway model, reaching out a hand. Before he can touch his own flesh and resolve the trauma, he wakes up back in the snow. Meanwhile, in the basement of Central, Father is playing a game of Ouija chess with figurines, listing his favorite human sacrifices: Hohenheim, Izumi, and the Elric brothers, confirming the whole family is screwed. General Armstrong arrives in the city with the subtlety of a battle tank and enters the Führer's office ready to lie through her teeth, admitting she took out Raven because the old man wouldn't shut up about the immortal soldiers and the evil plan. Bradley, who apparently loves a dangerous woman who eliminates the competition, decides to give her command of the central headquarters in exchange for Briggs, while her subordinates in the north continue to drool over the Ice Queen even in her absence. Meanwhile, Roy Mustang flirts with Risa in the cafeteria, using battleship codes disguised as gossip, and runs to the bathroom to discover that the president's son, Salim, is actually a homunculus, proving nepotism is the least of this government's problems. We travel to the past where our favorite deadbeat dad was still just slave number 23, an illiterate nobody scrubbing floors for an alchemist. Out of nowhere, a flask containing a talking gothic amoeba starts giving him private lessons, names the poor soul Hohenheim, and teaches him alchemy in exchange for blood, because nothing in this life is free. Years later, the king of Xerxes wants immortality and orders a colossal circle dug around the country. But when the ritual starts, the traitorous amoeba activates God mode, sucking everyone's souls and stuffing half into the flask and half into Hohenheim's body. The guy wakes up in the middle of a giant graveyard, immortal and filled with people screaming inside his head. Back in the present, Hohenheim finds Izumi and Sig. After seeing the woman coughing up her lungs, he decides to shove his entire hand into her without anesthesia. While her husband panics, Hohenheim rearranges her organs like they're Play-Doh to improve blood flow, revealing he is a walking philosopher's stone. Up north, Edward explains that Kimbley's stone is small but hopes he never sees a big one, unaware that his own father is basically a wholesale warehouse of human souls. The world's most random group continues dragging themselves through the mine, with Yoki finding wet dynamite, while Edward tries to convince Major Miles not to kill Kimbley because he still believes in the power of friendship and dialogue. But the Crimson Psychopath arrives sniffing blood like a shark on its period, bringing two chimeras to the party. Edward tries to play diplomat, but Kimbley knows exactly exactly where they are and creates a mist to blind the snipers, forcing the protagonist to fight the beastmen. While getting beaten like a stray dog, the midget realizes the dynamite won't work and decides to use his brain to transmute ammonia, knocking out the scent-sensitive chimeras with the stench. Edward thinks he's won after slicing the villain's hand and kicking his stone away, but Kimberly reveals he has oral talent and was hiding another stone in his mouth the whole time. He triggers a massive explosion that collapses an entire tower onto our pacifist hero's head.
Mercy is about to get you in a lot of trouble.
Basically an alchemist kebab, losing blood faster than his dignity. Basically an alchemist kebab, losing blood faster than his dignity. Instead of dying like a normal person, he uses his own life force to close the hole, sacrificing years of his lifespan just to avoid deleting his save file today. The chimeras are so impressed by the boy's heroic stupidity that they decide to betray their explosive boss and carry Edward on their backs to find a doctor, because apparently he's immortal, as long as the script says so. While Alphonse is currently disassembled and looking like a Lego set someone just kicked across the room, the group tries to put his armor back together without mixing up the parts. Mei Cheng, the only one in the room with 2 brain cells to rub together, decides to flip Scar's brother's notes upside down. She discovers that the nationwide transmutation circle was designed to counter Father's alchemy by connecting the dots with alkahestry logic. Meanwhile, down in the sewers, Sloth finally finishes digging the longest tunnel in history, and Pride shows up to chew out Kimberly, telling him to stop playing hide-and-seek and go cause some chaos in Briggs. Hohenheim pops up in Liore looking like a total hobo and asks to see the church basement. He walks over toxic water like some kind of alchemical Jesus and comes face to face with Pride in the darkness of the tunnel. The shadowy homunculus tries to attack, only to realize he's trapped inside the circle like a hamster in a cage, unable to leave without dying. Hohenheim, with the audacity of a man carrying 500,000 souls in his body, sends a message to Father letting him know that Slave 23 Inches is coming to collect the rent, declaring war right then and there. Up north, Kimberly tricks the Drachma army by telling them Briggs is vulnerable, sending the enemy soldiers straight into the meat grinder while General Armstrong is out of the house. It's an absolute massacre, proving that trusting psychopaths in white suits is never a good idea. And to top it all off on a shitty note, Zanpa No calls Envy to sell out the group's location, proving his loyalty lasts about as long as the audience's patience for these traitors. At the freezing Fort Briggs, Drachma's ill-prepared army gets decimated by cannons because their generic commander trusted Kimberly, who obviously betrays everyone and laughs while the soldiers blow up. While the slaughter is in full swing, little Mei tries to teach Chinese alchemy to Alphonse, but the Tin Can Kid understands feeling the dragon's pulse about as well as you understand moderation. Nearby, Zampano arrives with a disguised Envy, but it was all a ruse to trap the palm tree homunculus. Envy gets offended by the audacity of these lower humans and decides to turn into a giant green monster to crush everyone. However, he forgot he was messing with Scar, who used his magic little hand to deconstruct the villain's philosopher's stone. The result is humiliating. The terrifying monster is reduced to a pathetic green lizard. The lizard tries to bite Yoki's finger to possess his body, but the group warns him they'd kill Yoki without a second thought if that happened, proving the friendship there is about as solid as Jello. With the villain bottled up in a glass jar, Scar decides he needs to save the world and sends Mei back to Xing, because kids shouldn't get mixed up in military coups. Meanwhile, as Alphonse decides to head to Liore to dig some holes, General Armstrong discovers the High Command's dirty little secret. An old general takes her to the basement and shows off an army of immortal zombie mannequins, crash test dummies that look like they crawled out of a bankrupt toy maker's nightmare, ready to be used as disposable cannon fodder. In Liore, Father of the Year, Hohenheim finally reunites with his son, but the vibe is so awkward even the stones on the ground look embarrassed. The old man admits he's basically an immortal leather sack filled with screaming souls, which makes any family drama of yours look like a walk in the park. Meanwhile, Winry takes the chance to bathe at Rose's place, providing that moment of personal hygiene we all know you pause the screen to watch with extra attention. In the sub-levels of Central, a random chimera named Beto breaks into the zombie mannequin vault and runs into Greed. Greed has a bipolar identity crisis, accidentally kills his former friend, and starts having a psychotic break with Ling screaming about the power of friendship inside his head. It's the classic, "It's not me, it's my toxic alter ego" situation. Elsewhere, Edward is busy committing bank fraud using the military's name. When the soldiers try to arrest him, they realize too late that calling the pipsqueak short is a one-way ticket to getting your face slammed into a wall. The Fullmetal Alchemist and his new furry friends hijack a car, and Edward transmutes it to be unrecognizable, making their getaway like professional criminals. The episode closes with Greed, now completely unstable, breaking into Führer Bradley's house to settle the score. He tries to kill the dictator in front of his wife and son, but he realizes the mustachioed old man is way too OP, even in his pajamas. The greedy homunculus flips to coward mode and jumps out the window, leaving the Bradley family traumatized. The next morning, General Armstrong decides she wants to be the head of the Armstrong family. Her brother Alex reacts the only way he knows how, by ripping off all his clothes and standing there completely naked to fight, flexing his muscles and accessories in front of his sister. Their parents are so disgusted by the free nudist show that they flee to Xing immediately. Meanwhile, little May falls for Envy's lizard-brained lies. The green worm convinces her to head back to Central with the promise of immortality, proving the girl is easier to manipulate than Play-Doh. Over in a grimy hideout, Edward finds Ling starving to death, but Greed soon retakes control of the body. Our protagonist, desperate and lacking any moral high ground, offers to become the villain's lackey, accepting an evil internship in exchange for some gossip about the end of the world. In the end, an absurd game of telephone begins to pass a secret message. Izumi gets herself arrested on purpose, passes the message to the army at Briggs, who passes it to Grumman, who passes it to a flower girl, who stuffs a note inside a fake pack of cigarettes. Colonel Mustang receives the gift in the hospital and discovers that the promised day is coming in the spring, which means he finally has to get off his ass and actually do some work. Spring arrives and Winry decides the best way to travel is being smuggled as illegal cargo inside a water tank, because privacy is a dead concept in this anime. When she goes up to her room to change and reveal her mechanical curves, she bumps into Edward. Edward, being the idiot midget he is, tries to send her away, but Winry realizes he's a softie and decides to beat the crap out of everyone except him, demanding that the protagonist resolve his daddy issues and come back in one piece to eat her pie. While Edward and the monsters flee promising to be back for tea, the rest of the cast decides to play conspiracy. Scar and Marco are collecting Ishvalans like their Pokemon, while in the north, Grumman tries to stage a coup, but Bradley shows up to spoil the fun with his generic villain eye patch. On the train, Alphonse wakes up and realizes that, for a change, he's been captured. This time, it's by creepy shadows coming out of Pride, tying him up in a style that's a bit too questionable hentai, whispering that he's going to stay there nice and quiet until the promised day. In Central, Roy hands some flowers to Armstrong with a secret note, which she torches immediately because leaving evidence is for amateurs. The next day, Bradley's train explodes on a bridge, and while the generals panic like headless chickens, the game's creator, Father, appears with Sloth to remind everyone he's still the boss of this mess. Edward now has to save the world, his brother, and make sure he gets to eat Winry's pie, or she'll kill him before the homunculi do. Edward finally finds the dad who went out for a pack of cigarettes centuries ago and decides the best family therapy is a metal fist to the face. Hohenheim, who was expecting a hug, gets the news that his ex-wife died and told him to let him know she won the race to the grave, making the old man cry while eating with the chimeras. Edward, fed up with life, transmutes a new coat to maintain his shonen protagonist aesthetic and decides it's time to scrap. But the family reunion gets weird when Alphonse shows up, except it's not Al, it's Pride using his armor like a gothic puppet. Pride decides greed is a problem and tries to kill everyone, but Edward cuts the power to the whole city because fighting in the dark is the only strategy his brain has left. Meanwhile, Heinkel uses his dog nose to sniff out Salim Bradley in the woods, proving that creepy kids have a distinct smell. But the joy is short-lived because Gluttony shows up drooling and sniffing out the heroes like they're an all-you-can-eat buffet. The chimera goes full monster and starts wailing on the fat eater, but Greed realizes he's taking a beating and swaps places with Ling, who uses his ninja powers to track the enemy. Just when Gluttony thinks he's going to have the prince for dinner, Lon Fawn emerges from the shadows with a new automail arm and slices the homunculus like ham, proving that nothing says, "I love you, young master," like a bloody massacre in a dark forest. Lon Fawn continues turning Gluttony into mincemeat while Ling takes the opportunity to kick the fat guy who won't stop regenerating, which gets Greed excited inside his mind seeing such violence. Fu joins the party, sensing everyone's chi and realizing the situation is more crowded than a subway at rush hour. Meanwhile, Madame Christmas, the bar owner and Roy's secret foster mom, reveals that the Führer's son is older than the monarchy and decides to blow up her own establishment just for the drama, telling Roy to stop whining and act like a man. Roy heads into the sewers and finds his team of misfits ready for the final blow. Back in the forest, Edward uses his new carbon fiber hand to tank Pride's shadows, proving that science beats black magic. Edward tosses a flash grenade that forces Pride to let go of Alphonse's body, leaving the homunculus cornered. Realizing he's low on battery and Gluttony is useless sliced up baggage, Pride decides is the answer and devours his own brother to steal his life and sense of smell, in a scene that would make any nutritionist weep. Now tuned up with the fat guy's nose, Pride senses exactly where Hohenheim is. Roy intercepts Mistress Bradley's car and kidnaps the old lady, promising he won't hurt her, because nothing screams hero of the people like kidnapping the dictator's elderly wife in the middle of the street. While our short protagonist tries not to die, the proud shadow brat decides the best strategy is to turn Edward into a hostage, proving that anime villains really can't innovate. Lan Fan tries to be useful, but her mechanical arm decides to run a Windows update in the middle of the fight, leaving her vulnerable to being shredded until Edward saves her, pointing out the obvious fact that her scrap metal is junk. Meanwhile, Hohenheim finally decides to be a dad and explains to Alphonse that his body is being used as an Airbnb by the Shadow Kid. Greed decides to bail to go rule the world, making it clear that priorities are for the weak, while the absent father of the year reveals his genius plan. He creates a giant earth dome, trapping himself and Alphonse in total darkness with Pride, because apparently locking your youngest son in a mud ball with no food or light is the peak of responsible parenting. Alphonse agrees to this insanity because being an empty tin can, he doesn't need to breathe and is already used to being useless in combat anyway. On the surface, the corrupt government decides to clean house and orders the execution of everyone in Mustang's squad, including Bradley's wife, who finds out the hard way that her market value has dropped to 0. As shots ring out, Roy realizes that being a war hero doesn't give you immunity against being shot by generic extras, and the situation gets darker than the humor in this script. The generic soldiers prepare to turn Mustang's team into Swiss cheese, but they're caught off guard when Roy opens fire on his own men, proving that military loyalty is worth less than a $3 bill. Mistress Bradley questions if she was betrayed by her husband, but Roy promises to protect her with charm and napalm. While they flee, Armstrong tries to teach the fat old generals how to wage war, but they insist on treating her like a hostage, ignoring the fact that she has more testosterone than the entire room combined. Suddenly, an ice cream truck appears in the middle of the battlefield. It's the most ridiculous thing possible, but it brings guns, ammo, and Maria Ross, who returns from the dead, sponsored by Havoc, who's now a successful capitalist arms dealer. Mustang's team escapes in the ice cream truck, turning a military coup into a cartoon chase sequence. Underground, Edward and his troop of misfits invade the secret lab only to face an army of pale, one-eyed mannequins that start screaming like they're at a Black Friday sale. These deep web crash test dummies wake up hungry for human flesh, and the scientist who created them realizes too late that making immortal monsters might not have been his brightest idea. The idiot general releases the Cyclops dolls thinking they'll obey him, but he gets devoured instantly in a beautiful moment of instant karma, proving that having a brain isn't a requirement for high rank. Edward and the Chimera start playing Resident Evil against the zombie mannequins who moan for mommy, which would be sad if it wasn't so grotesque. While Edward tries not to become doll food, General Armstrong, who was busy humiliating her superiors, comes face to face with Sloth, the world's fastest lazy homunculus. Armstrong tries to stab the thing through sheer rage, but just as she's about to be crushed, Major Armstrong bursts through the wall, glowing and posing like a bodybuilder in the middle of the apocalypse, because aesthetic is more important than survival. The Armstrong family decides to turn the giant into a piece of abstract art using nothing but their fists. Meanwhile, Kimberly blows up Hohenheim's earth bubble, ruining their social distancing. Heinkel, who was nearly dead, decides to toss his principles in the trash, along with the Philosopher's Stone he had in his pocket, and hands it to Alphonse. Alphonse, who spent the whole anime saying he'd never use the power of human souls, looks at the stone, looks at Kimberly, and decides that hypocrisy is a small price to pay to have legs again. He fixes the armor's feet and stands up ready to throw down, proving that even the saint of the tin can cracks when the pressure is on. Alphonse finally decides to stop being the useless little brother and uses the Philosopher's Stone to play God, raising smoke screens and regenerating his armor like he's using an infinite health cheat code. He traps Pride in an earth dome, but the arrogant homunculus uses shadows to slice through everything, forcing Alphonse to rip off his own foot and transmute it into a sword, proving he'd literally give a limb to win this fight. While Kimberly makes irrelevant comments about the morality of equivalent exchange, Alphonse shows he's got more brains than body and uses flashbangs to blind the shadow brat. Armstrong realizes the big guy can take a lot of penetration, so she and her buff brother jam swords and fists into him, but the creature just regenerates, complaining that living is a drag. Alex takes a beating to the face, Armstrong trips like a horror movie protagonist, but they keep fighting with style. Back underground, Heinkel, the chimera nobody cared about until now, bites Kimberly's neck and drags his body into a car, fleeing with Dr. Marco and Yoki, who surprisingly serves a purpose other than crying. Pride swallows the wounded Kimberly to keep him in his body inventory. In Central, Mustang pulls off the most ridiculous camouflage in history, turning an ice cream truck into a meat delivery truck to invade the base because nothing screams military coup like a ribeye delivery. Edward continues his fight against the immortal dolls until Mustang arrives, burning everything to a crisp and noting that the Steel Boy always attracts trouble. The city panics during a radio broadcast where Mistress Bradley proves to be the most delusional person on the continent, thinking her genocidal husband is a saint. Brita takes the mic and drops some wholesome fake news, claiming the Führer is missing and that Mustang is the hero saving the nation, manipulating public opinion faster than a digital influencer selling a masterclass. While the soldiers debate whether to shoot or not, a Briggs tank spawns out of nowhere, because apparently the Armstrong mansion has parking for heavy artillery. Underground, Mustang looks at the mannequin dolls and decides to host a mass barbecue, incinerating them all in a fire blast that would make any pyromaniac weep with joy. Envy drops into the party and tries his usual "humans are so fun" spiel, but Roy only wants to know who killed Hughes. When the idiot homunculus admits to the crime and transforms into the dead man's wife to taunt him, Roy loses what little sanity he had left. The Colonel goes full psychopath mode and starts boiling Envy's eyes, burning his tongue, and turning the giant monster into a target at a shooting gallery. Envy realizes he messed with the wrong guy and scurries through the tunnels like the cowardly cockroach he is, but Roy hunts him down with blood in his eyes, leaving Riza behind. But since she's stubborn and knows a man blinded by rage makes mistakes, she disobeys and follows, finding the Colonel in the dark hallways. But instead of hugging her boss, she points her gun at the back of his head, because the romance in this anime is just built different. The episode opens with a flashback showing Roy burning Riza's back to destroy her father's research. Definitely the most bizarre and painful foreplay in history. Back in the present, Riza points her gun at Mustang and asks what he calls her when they're alone. The imposter stammers. Riza smiles and pumps him full of lead, revealing that the real Roy calls her by her first name in private, confirming there's definitely something going on there. But the real Roy arrives, turning the hallway into a literal hellscape. Roy burns Envy repeatedly, reducing the giant to a pathetic, whimpering green lizard trying to crawl away. As Roy prepares the final blow to fry the vermin, Riza points her gun at her own boss, while Edward and Scar arrive to give a moral lecture about how revenge is bad, yada yada yada. Edward grabs the little monster and throws it in his face that he's envious because humans, despite being weak, help one another. Envy can't handle the humiliation of being psychoanalyzed by a short teenager. He rips out his own stone and kills himself, proving his ego was the only thing bigger than his monster form. Meanwhile, Alex Armstrong keeps taking a beating bleeding from Sloth with a dislocated arm, but he uses the force of an impact to pop his shoulder back into place, because for him, orthopedics is solved through brute force. He and Armstrong continue the battle against the mountain of laziness. The episode closes with Izumi Curtis popping out of the ground after digging a tunnel with her bare hands, proving that furious housewives are the most dangerous force in this universe, while Hohenheim finally finds father, bracing for the most awkward family reunion of all time. Roy Mustang proves that without Hawkeye, he's just a useless blind man leading a parade of idiots underground, while Scar has to endure the romantic tension and unwanted gratitude in the middle of a sewer. On the surface, General Clay Min realizes too late that he's been played because Izumi used alchemy to dig a giant hole in his defenses, invading Central HQ like she owns the place. Armstrong and Alex Armstrong try not to get turned into paste by Sloth, who, despite being the sin of laziness, moves faster than you running from responsibilities on a Monday. But just when all seems lost, the most terrifying housewife in the universe arrives with her colossal husband, Sig Curtis. What follows is the most testosterone-fueled bromance scene in history. Sig and Alex decide that the middle of a war zone is the perfect time to rip off their shirts, flex their sparkling muscles, and share a manly handshake while Sloth is beaten to death by sheer protein and bodybuilding poses. The homunculus decides that living is too much work and evaporates, proving to be the most relatable character in the show. Father tries to absorb Hohenheim's Philosopher's Stone with a suspicious tentacle coming out of his back, only to find that swallowing Hohenheim won't be as easy as he expected. Hohenheim finally reveals that the secret to his immortality is a form of organized collective schizophrenia, having conversed with over 500,000 souls inside his body until he convinced them to betray Father. The gothic villain isn't pleased. He discards his human skin like an old pair of pajamas, and creates a giant eye on the ceiling because subtlety and interior design were never his strong suits. On the surface, King Bradley, also known as the world's most dangerous senior citizen, decides to ignore the laws of physics. He faces a tank head-on, dodges bullets out of pure spite, and slices the armored vehicle in half with a sword, proving that metal is just butter when you're wrath. After turning Captain Buccaneer's arm into twisted scrap metal, Bradley finds Falman crying in a corner, shaking like a leaf, and apologizing to Roy for being completely useless. But before the massacre ends, Greed drops from the sky with the audacity of someone trying to steal the scene, switching personalities with Ling mid-fight just to confuse the old man. Fu, the ninja grandpa, joins the party with colored smoke bombs, swearing revenge against the Führer for taking his granddaughter's arm, unaware he's about to enter a mustachioed human blender. Lon Fawn rushes through the sewers smelling tragedy, while Izumi Curtis handles international politics by slapping corrupt generals in the face, teaching the troops that violence does solve things. Underground, Ed's group encounters a doctor with gold teeth who looks like he escaped a bad rap video. He summons an army of bootleg Bradleys that fight like possessed inflatable tube men. Outside, the fight turns into an absolute horror show. Bradley humiliates Old Man Fu, slicing his bandana and leaving the ninja blind mid-combat with a gash across his forehead. Fu tries to blow himself up in a glorious suicide attack, but Bradley snuffs out the bomb fuses, denying him even the right to die with style. That's when Captain Buccaneer decides to be the MVP of brutality, thrusting a sword through his own body and his allies to impale Bradley. A human sacrifice kebab that makes Lon Fawn scream in trauma from a distance. As chaos reigns and Bradley finally bleeds, the gold-toothed doctor activates the transmutation circle, and the floor decides it's time to swallow the sacrifices. Edward, Alphonse, and Izumi are sucked into a dimensional portal, leaving everyone else staring into the void like a taxi driver who lost his passenger mid-ride. On top of the wall, Greed and Führer Bradley decide to see who falls first in a death embrace, hanging off the ledge in a scene worthy of Titanic. Old Man Wrath holds on to Greed, who is holding onto a brick that's giving way, proving this country's military infrastructure was built with sand and spit. Lon Fawn arrives late as usual, realizes Grandpa has already kicked the bucket, and tries to help, but the weight of 2 muscular homunculi is too much for her automail arm. A random Briggs soldier lands a lucky shot on Bradley, sending the myopic dictator falling into the moat smelling like sewage. Ling Yao regains control, weeps for his dead grandfather, and begs for a doctor, but no one cares because they're too busy being gunned down. Captain Buccaneer, that absolute bear of a man, wakes up just to say his heroic last words and ask Ling to protect the main gate, ensuring Fu's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Ling, driven by guilt and the plot, convinces Greed to lend him the ultimate shield steroids. Ling goes down the elevator shouting warning warnings to anyone who doesn't want to die, and since subtlety isn't his thing, he blows everything up in an explosion that would make Michael Bay weep with pride. Outside, he turns into a human tank and overruns a military truck with his bare fists. Meanwhile, the gold-toothed doctor corners Mustang's group underground. He demands the colonel perform a human transmutation to open the portal. Mustang, who actually read the manual, knows it doesn't work, but when he sees Lieutenant Hawkeye bleeding out on the floor like a broken faucet, he realizes the doctor is holding his best girl hostage. The old man offers the Philosopher's Stone to save the blonde if Roy does the dirty work. It's the classic choice. Save the world or save the waifu. It looks like Mustang is about to give in to the old man's charms to save Hawkeye, but he's actually just buying time to drop a one-liner and say he's not doing a damn thing. The doctor is shocked that someone would sacrifice their own waifu, but before he can speak to the manager, a giant glob of spit hits his head. It's Jerso, the chimera who spits more than a llama, trapping the old man in disgusting goo. Mei Ching falls from the ceiling with the subtlety of a meteor and starts mopping the floor with the zombies, allowing Mustang to burn everything with his remaining glove. While Mei uses alchemy to patch the holes in Hawkeye, King Bradley emerges from the depths of the sewer, proving that bad weeds grow tall, even after being stabbed, shot, and falling into a pit. He's furious because humans insist on having hope. Mei senses father's key and tries to run, but she's stopped by Selim Bradley, the edgy goth kid, who decided to join the party. Wrath, in a moment of pure hacking, pins Mustang's hands to the floor with swords, turning the colonel into a modern art project. Since Mustang refuses to cooperate, Pride and Wrath decide to force the portal open. They use the gold-toothed doctor as recyclable material, turning the old man into a grotesque amoeba to activate the circle. Mustang is sucked into the portal against his will, and when he wakes up on the other side with Edward and Izumi, he realizes the toll was heavy. He's lost his sight and is now blinder than a ref at a football game. Meanwhile, Scar decides to face Wrath up top. The dictator asks Scar's name. Scar says he has none, and Wrath admits he doesn't know his own either. Basically, two violent amnesiacs decide to see who kills who first. Underground, Alphonse has an existential crisis seeing his scrawny body at the gate, but decides to stay in the armor to tank the final boss. Priorities. The episode starts with a touching moment where Edward reunites with Maria Ross and cries, but nobody cares because the real heat is underground. Daddy Dearest, who really needs therapy for his god complex, announces he has his 5 human sacrifices and that they are already inside him. Mei Cheng tries to solo the final boss, but finds out the hard way that punching a Lovecraftian god is a bad idea when he doesn't even need to move to blow you up. Upstairs, Scar and Wrath continue their violent mating dance. Wrath is full of holes and bleeding out, but he keeps fighting like he's on a stroll in the park. Scar, tired of being the punching bag, decides to take his shirt off mid-fight, not to seduce him, but to show he did his homework and tattooed his left arm with reconstruction alchemy. He spikes the floor and catches the Führer by surprise, proving that reading books pays off more than just hitting the gym. Meanwhile, Short Stack Edward faces Pride, who is literally falling apart. The arrogant homunculus mocks Ed's height, forgetting that being small is an advantage when you want to headbutt someone in the teeth. Edward uses his thick skull to break Pride's face, but the joy is short-lived because Father decides playtime is over. He pins everyone to the floor with shadow tentacles and activates the nationwide transmutation circle. Greed tries to be a smartass and steal the power, but Father says not today, and uses the eclipse to open a portal in the sky. A giant door opens in the clouds, a colossal eye appears, and the villain reaches for the sky to pull God down like he's picking an apple, sucking out every soul in the country in an all-you-can-eat spiritual buffet. Father decides that swallowing God is a balanced diet and tries to delete the entire population of Amestris with a snap of his fingers, turning everyone into human batteries while showing off his new, buff, mystical youth look. He even creates a tiny sun in his hand to show his divinity complex is peaking.
What's that? The power of God is now in my control. With that, I can do anything. For instance, I can create a sun right in the palm of my hand.
But Hohenheim, the absent father of the year, reveals he spent centuries spreading his spiritual seed across the country, literally planting souls like magic potatoes. When the eclipse hits and the moon's shadow covers the land, the reverse transmutation circle activates and vomits the souls back into their owners' bodies, leaving Father with cosmic indigestion and no fuel to keep God in his gut. Meanwhile, Führer King Bradley proves he's as stubborn as an atomic cockroach fighting Scar. The genocidal old man tries for the final blow, but the sun, which clearly hates fascists, glints off the blade and blinds him for a second, allowing Scar to rip his arms off in an extreme acupuncture session. Even armless, the old man bites his sword and tries to stab Scar with his mouth, which would be impressive if it weren't so pathetic. Downstairs, Edward fights Pride, the spoiled gothic shadow. The kid tries to possess Ed's body but runs into Kimberly inside the Storm of Souls. Kimberly is just chilling in the chaos like a psychopath on vacation and decides to mess with Pride just for the hell of it. Edward takes advantage of the confusion, turns himself into a human philosopher's stone, invades Pride's body with full force, and humbles the kid. The supreme villain tries to play The Sims, creating new humans from Xerxes just to blow them up 2 seconds later in a divine tantrum. But the gang arrives for the beatdown. Mustang is blinder than a mole in a gunfight, needing Hawkeye to be his artillery seeing eye dog while he snaps fire randomly, hoping to hit something that isn't his friends. Greed flies in thinking he's going to steal God's power, but ends up being sucked in by his toxic, greedy father. He tries to drain the old man's power but realizes father's void is deeper than he can handle. Edward, Izumi, and the muscle-bound Armstrong try to help with their fists, but Edward ends up pinned to a concrete rebar like a chicken kebab, his automail arm destroyed and unable to move as father comes drooling toward him for a snack. Alphonse, who is hanging by a thread with his armor cracking, realizes being a broken tin can isn't helping anyone. He looks at Mei Chang and asks her to help him commit tactical suicide. The metal boy performs the ultimate equivalent exchange, offering his own soul in exchange for his brother's original flesh and blood right arm, a maneuver that would give any doctor a heart attack. Edward wakes up with his meat arm back in place, and seeing his brother disappear, he enters absolute rage mode. He stands up and starts transmuting without a circle, ripping the iron from his own arm and conjuring a rain of punches on father. Now with 2 functional arms and the hatred of 1,000 demons, he starts beating the divinity like he owes him lunch money, while everyone watches from the sidelines cheering, "Go get him, son!" The massacre continues with Edward using father as a punching bag, proving that divinity means nothing against a very pissed-off blonde dwarf. The villain tries to suck out Greed's stone in a desperate last-ditch effort not to become fertilizer, but Greed, in a rare moment of not being a selfish jerk, decides to use his hardening ability to turn father's body into the flimsiest carbon in the universe. He basically turns the supreme god into a cheap charcoal pencil before being ripped out and dying happy. With his body crumbling like a dry cookie, father is sucked back to the gate of truth, where he gets the ultimate cosmic lecture from that arrogant white blob about how he never grew as a person and only wanted to steal others' power like a parasite. He's condemned to the void forever. Back in reality, Edward looks at Alphonse's empty armor and refuses Hohenheim's offer to sacrifice himself because enough people have died to fix things. Edward draws a human circle and goes to talk to Truth. The kid looks God in the eye and says he's trading his own ability to use alchemy, his gate, for his brother back. Truth finds this hilarious and accepts the payment, returning a whole naked and scrawny Alphonse to the living world. The anime ends with everyone crying and hugging, Hohenheim finally kicking the bucket in front of his wife's grave with the smile of someone who finally beat the game, and the Elric brothers realizing that the real alchemy was the friends who lost limbs and organs along the way. And so the saga ends, with less magic, but with a lot more therapy needed for everyone. Dr. Knox drags Marco to visit Mustang in the hospital, who is currently training to be the blind daredevil while trying to become a politician. Marco pulls a philosopher's stone out of his pocket and suggests the colonel use the souls of his compatriots to fix his vision, which sounds totally ethical. Mustang accepts, but demands that the useless havoc be healed first. Priorities are priorities. Meanwhile, General Armstrong and Miles convince Scar to lead the Ishvalan religion, since nothing screams peace and reconstruction like a nameless ex-serial killer terrorist. Edward and Alphonse finally crawl back home, with Alphonse's original body looking like an atrophied noodle. They remember that the greedy Ling became Emperor of Xing and promised to protect Mei's clan. Arriving in Resenbol, Winry runs out and cries, seeing that the 2 idiots are finally whole, resulting in the group hug we waited years for. 2 years pass, and Edward is fixing roofs by hand because he lost his alchemy, while the new Führer Grumman watches Mistress Bradley raise Salim, who reincarnated as a cute kid, though everyone knows he's a homicidal time bomb waiting to go off. Alphonse decides to travel east to learn alchemy from Mei and visits the Hughes family to explain his new math of receiving 10 and giving back 11, which financially is an emotional pyramid scheme, but they buy it. At the train station, Edward tries to be romantic in the most virgin nerd way possible, proposing an equivalent exchange where he gives half his life for half of Winry's. Winry, tired of this 60-episode dragging, tells him she'll give him everything and calls the alchemist an idiot before accepting the proposal.
I'll give half of my life to you if you give half of yours to me!
Ugh, it's nonsense! How about I just give you my whole life?
The anime ends with a photo montage proving everyone ended up okay. Scar is working hard, Mustang grew a ridiculous mustache after getting his sight back, and Edward and Winry proved they understood human biology very well by appearing with 2 kids in their arms. In the end, lessons are only worth it if they come with pain, forging a full metal heart in the process.